Bionic 1 online, Professor.
Ooh, I've got it. I know what you should start the script with. Metal is the new black. No, never mind. When I say it out loud, it's lame. They were the best of toys. They were the worst of toys. Predictable. What if... No, that won't work. In the 80s... that sounds pat. If you quote Nietzsche... No. Nobody knows who Nietzsche is. Sometimes invisibility is a great power, but on pegs, no, that's weak. This is really hard.
It's one thing when you reflect on a toy line that you know like the back of your hand. It's also common to look back on a toy line you were familiar with but didn't really commit to it as a kid and moved on to other more appealing lines. And with the 1980s action figure boom, I've often found myself producing retrospectives on toy lines I never had a single figure from, but was still very aware of in childhood due to toy store visits and the many commercials on TV back in the day. My collection is filled with lines I knew about back then, but never once had a single toy from as a child. However, what doesn't often happen is encountering a toy line and a cartoon that existed during my childhood, and somehow I never saw one frame of the TV series, nor recollect seeing a single action figure on store shelves. Even in cases where the show didn't air where I grew up, like Robotech, I was still very aware of the toys and the existence of a cartoon. Some toy lines that didn't even have a show, like Crystar and Dragon Riders of the Styx, were still ones I knew about as a child. That is not the situation I find myself in with Bionic Six. Somehow both the cartoon and the toys avoided all discovery in my youth. The first things to get out of the way here are 1. The toys were made by LJN, the same people who did Thundercats and the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom toys. And 2. The action figures were 3 3/4 inches tall and almost completely made of die-cast metal. Die-cast action figures of human characters really hadn't been attempted too many times in the 1980s prior to LJN's Bionic Six in 1986. The Mego company tried it with their 1982 Eagle Force military line of figures, and then Defenders of the Earth gave all of their action figures die-cast metal forearms, something I still don't quite understand, but that's a video for a later date. The point is, LJN was swinging for the fences here with Bionic Six. The figures have vibrant paint schemes, and when you find them in mint condition, are some truly gorgeous toys. Drawbacks to all die-cast metal figurines come down to the joints. The added weight makes the hinges loosen up rapidly. LJN tried to take this into account by making only the main torso and lower legs of the figures die-cast metal. In many ways, the figures are as articulated as the original 1982 straight-arm G.I. Joes, except with a solid waist swivel instead of a rubber O-ring holding them together. Even with the concessions of plastic arms, head, and upper legs, the Bionic Six figures are still fatally prone to loose knees, which render them difficult to remain upright if their condition is too worn. The line was split into 2 teams, the Bennett family, and Dr. Scarab's evil minions of destruction. And LJN really went for broke, putting out 13 action figures in total. The Bennetts give us Jack, Helen, JD, Meg, Bungie, Eric, and Fluffy. Right off the bat, anyone familiar with the series will notice that Fluffy looks nothing like his animated counterpart. I'm sure it's one of those situations where LJN was provided early concept art or something before it was changed on the animation side of things. Fluffy is a massive hunk of metal with ridiculously awkward-looking forearms, and came on a giant card back compared to the other figures. He's practically a mini vehicle, and towers rightfully over the other characters. What's odd about the way LJN handled the rest of the family is the figures are not referred to by their bionic names on the card backs, but rather their actual human names. And yes, while the bionic names make no sense, I would think they'd be more exciting to read on a card back for a kid thinking about buying one. I mean, I'd get more excited for an action figure called Bionic 1 than Jack. But maybe they felt names like Mother 1 and IQ were duds in the making. Less exciting than even Helen and JD. More bizarre is how on the back of the figure cards, their basic names are trademarked. You might want to check with a lawyer if your name is Eric or Meg, because you might owe a corporation some money. As beautiful as these figures are, and they are astounding to look at, LJN packed them with some weird accessories that the card backs do nothing to explain. Jack comes with a backpack with an air-breathing mask, which may have been used in some episodes when they go underwater, but I can't recall with any certainty. His double-handed gizmo could be the device they were using at the glacier in the episode that explained their origin story if you squint at it really hard.
I'm getting a reading.
Meg comes with a belt. I guess it's her Walkman hanging off of it. Maybe? I really can't tell. What's doubly ridiculous is how her Sonic Blaster harness is molded onto the figure in the closed position.
Here's a blast from the past for you two!
While her mother Helen inexplicably comes with an accessory that looks like Meg's Sonic Blaster harness in the open position. I have this sneaking feeling their accessories were switched accidentally, because Helen's costume has a much wider belt, but I could be completely incorrect. So it's a good thing I simply can't bring myself to care. Bungie comes with a laser rifle I'm confident he never used. The guy was a martial arts super soldier. He never needed weapons. Just like JD never wore Burt Reynolds' cowboy hat from Smokey and the Bandit.
Oh, I love your suits.
Not even his card art shows this hat. It's so random you'd almost be fine with the accessory missing in a collection. JD also comes with these two bicep gizmos, and I have no idea what they do except fall off his arms all the time. Finally, there's Eric, the only character with accessories that make sense. He comes with a bat and a glove, both of which are seen in the series. Speaking of glove, most of the Minions of Destruction come with items that don't feel nearly as random. While the Bennett family are essentially a group of costumed superheroes, the bad guys all used weapons and tech in their schemes. Glove comes with his glove, of course, as well as some kind of laser gun. Mechanic has his tool belt and his pair of massive welding gauntlets. Madame O comes with her jetpack thingy and a ray gun. Clunk, who like Fluffy looks nothing like his cartoon version, has an arm device, either a gun or a drill. It's hard to say. Chopper is packed with a backpack sporting a shoulder blaster. I should also mention they didn't make his skin green on his card art. Lastly, the leader of the bad guys, Dr. Scarab, has his own tool belt and a pair of bolt cutters. Your guess is as good as mine. The villains are a motley crew of weirdos that have just as detailed sculpting and deco as the Bennetts, but I'm not going to claim they're anywhere as iconic as the Bionic Six on a display shelf. I can also see why many of these villains didn't inspire purchases. Dr. Scarab alone screams peg warmer. He's a short, ugly hunk of die-cast metal. When your main baddie is Toy Store Poison, that isn't a good sign. LJN didn't stop with the figures. They went to the nines with their vehicle offerings as well. First up is the Bionic Six dirt bike. It's their off-road bike from the show that turns into an off-road trike that flies if it wants to, I guess. It's a nice little vehicle with great detail, vac metallized accent pieces, and a workable if underwhelming transformation. It turns from a motorcycle into, well, a motorcycle. The dirt bike is a delicate toy, and the handlebars and rear exhaust assembly require a light touch to avoid breaking them. The other smaller vehicle in the line is the Quad Runner. It's pretty much a basic 1980s four-wheeler, the undersized Cobra Ferret of the Bionic Six line. While the seat looks like it should accommodate two figures, I assure you it will not, unless you are okay with scratching up the die-cast figures and possibly breaking parts of the runner in the process. The runner transforms into a slightly more decked-out four-wheeler, with an extending bumper hook blade thingy on the front, the bonnet opening to reveal a pair of laser guns, and the various roll bars rotating upward above the driver to allow the laser cannon to flip over the driver's head and point forward. If you have one of these in complete condition, I would strongly advise you to keep the runner in its transformed mode for the sake of the roll bars. They are made of that silver-colored plastic that gets very brittle over many years and can shatter with a lot of use and abuse. use. The pressure placed on the roll bar hinge points by rotating them often doesn't give me a good feeling. Also, I'd recommend you not use the cannon hook around the front roll bar for the same reasons. Just set the cannon hook lightly against the roll bar without snapping it down, and you'll save your quad runner's pristine condition for many years to come. The runner has a manually activated rear gear system in the wheels. Push down slightly on the back axle before moving forward to allow the laser cannon to pump in and out. Look, at least you can be assured it's a full 6. It's in the name. And if you don't push down on the back axle, the quad runner's wheels won't want to roll, so get pumping. Now, before we get to the flagship vehicle of the line, we've got to take a brief detour and talk about this pair of laser thrones included in the assortment. Light effect toys were all the rage around 1987, with Brave Star and Captain Power being some of the more notable ones. The Bionic Six line gave us the laser arrow chair and the flying laser throne. As goofy as these are in concept, they were a part of the animated series. Dr. Scarab had this janky flying contraption he sat in, and later in the series, Professor Sharp constructed this chair thingy for his own use. Their only purpose in the toy line is to battle each other, with a series of laser sounds and a whimpering defeat sound when one of them manages to get hit. I should mention the laser throne is the only vehicle given to the villains in this line, and as you can imagine, it is purpose-built to accommodate the bulky Dr. Scarab figure. If you find yourself with an unused laser throne like I did, you'll be in a collector quandary. The handle and battery compartment for the throne is wholly made from that brittle, silvery plastic, and the installation would be a one-way trip, with no safe way to remove the handle again without snapping off all the tabs. The handle also makes the throne less accurate to the show, which means it looks better on display without it installed anyway. So I'm leaving it unassembled, and I'll let the next collector decide what they want to do with it. These ships aren't very fun to play with or look at. They're the colonial stellar probes of the Bionic Six line. Lame of thrones. Okay, now we come to the flagship vehicle of this series, and this thing incorporates some of the best and worst toy design instincts I've discussed in previous retrospectives. The Bionic Six Mule's van is an ambitious, well-intentioned attempt to make the very vehicle from the animated series that takes the Bennett family to the next global crisis. It's a hefty size with vac metal accented wheels and some eye-popping deco from the paint scheme and the sticker design. Admittedly, a lot of the stickers on my Mule's van disappeared years before I acquired it, but I was able to find an unused sheet of Mule's van decals to go with it, so maybe one day I'll scan the sheet and replace the missing decals with some reproductions. The Mule's van is a deceiving beast. From its outward profile, it looks like the kind of vehicle that will succeed where the Ecto-1 failed, by being able to accommodate the entire Bennett family. It's got these lifting side panels to give the Bionic Six access to this chrome turning gear gizmo, and on the other side, they have this 1980s version of what looks like GPS. Whatever it is, it's science, bitch! Unfortunately, the Mule's best feature is also its worst. The entire vehicle is built around the function of housing the other two vehicles, which were sold separately. The front driver's compartment holds two figures, but is mysteriously devoid of a dashboard or steering wheel. That's because the entire front of the vehicle splits apart to allow the quad runner inside and behind the front seats. While the Mule's van did operate this way in the show, it was half magical in its logic and conveniently didn't sacrifice passenger space in the doing. If you don't own the quad runner, you just have this huge gaping void in the driving compartment that can't be used for anything else, because the void is open to the ground. The back section of the Mule's van is similarly configured. The rear doors open and a deployment ramp comes down to allow the dirt bike to roll up into the rear floor of the van, with cutouts in the platform specifically for the bike's wheels in standard motorcycle mode. On top of the van, a sunroof splits open, and using the rear spoiler as a lever, you can lift the dirt bike up to deploy it off the top of the Mules, just like in the show. Except, not really. In order to lower the main elevator lever, the rear doors of the van have to be open, and that kind of spoils the entire effect, as well as the intended surprise. The van therefore cannot deploy the bike while on the move, which defeats the whole purpose of having the roof exit to begin with. At the same time, you'll notice all of the official artwork and photography from LJN shows either Meg or Helen on the bike when it deploys, and that's for good reason. The bay at the rear of the van is so narrow, only the female figures can ride the bike while inside the Mule's vehicle. If you try to put a dude on the bike and force the whole combo into the back of the van, the elevator mechanism won't work and the whole thing jams up. And the action figure of IQ has a very unique problem from the rest of the Bennett family, in that his action figure is so big, he can't fit on the bike in the back of the van, nor can he fit in either the driver or passenger seats in the front of the van. His bulk compared to the other figures also makes it difficult for him to ride either the quad runner or the dirt bike. LJN really left IQ without a chair when the music stopped. Deployment configurations for the patrol vehicles when in the Mule's van is also a compromise between their standard and alt modes. The quad runner must have its roll bars in the battle-ready position. Remember how I said it's better to just leave them in the Bionic mode? Well, this is another area where that pays off. However, the front bonnet and the bumper hook must be closed and retracted. Meanwhile, the dirt bike has to be in standard cycle mode, but for the rear exhaust, which needs to be flipped upward in the Bionic mode, otherwise you risk snapping the exhaust assembly off the bike when you attempt to raise the bike through the roof. All of this makes the Mule's van an ambitious toy, and I salute LJN in the attempt. But given how much of the van's design is prioritized for the other vehicles and not the figures themselves, it means we have another flagship ride that can't take the entire team along. In the past, I've praised toys like the G.I. Joe headquarters for incorporating vehicles into its design, but in those cases the toy accommodated a variety of vehicles. And even if you didn't have vehicles, you could still play with the headquarters and the figures and not feel like something was completely missing. The Mule's is literally hollow without the other two vehicles, and that isn't good. LJN made no attempt to include removable rear seat inserts for either the main cab or the rear area to seat figures for those kids that didn't have the dirt bike or quad runner. And if most kids were like the ones I was and knew growing up, you very rarely had the entire run of any figure line, especially the vehicles. And can we talk about the acronym for a second? Mules, allegedly standing for Mobile Utility Energizing Station. So that's Mobile, Uti, Liddy, Energizing Station. To get mules, they split one word into some of its syllables, but not the others. Because if we're playing by the rules, it would be muse. And if we go with syllables, it would be called the MBUTEEGZST. I'm sorry, I need a drink. Which brings us to the centerpiece playset of this line, the Bionic Six Secret Headquarters Super High-Tech Bionic Laboratory, which has to be the longest, stupidest name for a playset I think I've ever encountered. They couldn't have just called it the Secret Laboratory?
And now, for our American viewers...
They couldn't have just called it the Secret Laboratory? We begin our journey with a cartoon-inspired secret doorway, opened via a rubber band-assisted mechanism that is activated when statues of Ben Franklin and Einstein twerk the bricks to bump the doors open. At that point, your figures wander into what can only be described as the landscape of the Mousetrap board game, now mildly reskinned for some kind of sci-fi theme. Your figure is expected to get into a hanging saddle and take an extremely short ride to the central hub of the playset. From there, two other wings radiate out from the center, and all of these arms can be placed in any position around the central core of the headquarters. There's a lot here to describe, and very little of it makes sense. So buckle up. First up is the central core, with an alley of computer stuff directly underneath, and two opening doors revealing more computer equipment for the Bionic Six to do science, bitch! At the top of this edifice is what the instructions call the Energizer turntable, which is somewhat akin to the device used to make the Bennett family bionic. It's essentially a centrifuge that can be operated via a turning wheel on the side of the dais. Why they have Dr. Scarab in this contraption on the box art if this is the secret lab of the Bionic Six is beyond illogical. Attached to the centrifuge is a massive pivoting microscope gadget called the beam projector. I'm not sure what this is for beyond getting an unwelcome detailed look at Scarab's rotten batch. On the next arm is what the instructions call the time capsule unit, even though the outer box calls it the elevator unit. Either way, I have a lot of questions. For one, if it's a time capsule, why is it limited to going between the upper and lower floor of the lab? I mean, can I set the capsule to 1978 on the second floor, and then when I go back to the bottom floor, it's 1987 again? Hey guys, so glad you could join us. We're having Chicken a la King in a few minutes, and we're listening to a few Bee Gees records until dinner is ready. Oh, and make sure you put your car keys in the big glass jar, so everyone goes home with a party favor, if you know what I mean. God, I hate this elevator. It's the worst! Or is the entire wing a time capsule that disappears when used? If so, why is the capsule attached to a lookout tower and a defensive position with 2 mounted laser cannons? Are we going back to prehistory to slaughter cavemen for sport? And let's assume it's simply the elevator capsule as the box indicates. Okay, cool. So we ride in on the hanging chair and then take this multicolored good and plenty to the 2nd floor. But do you see the problem we still have here? I'm gonna wait and see if you figure it out. No? You're not seeing it? If this is a secret laboratory that has to be accessed via the booty-shaking scientist statues through the hidden wall, why and where is there a guard tower and gun emplacement needed? Ostensibly, this wing of the base is exposed to the exterior of the building to defend it from attack, which would mean this laboratory isn't at all secret. And from the number of Scarab's minions inside the lab on the box, it would seem neither the secret entrance nor the lookout tower did jack in keeping the lab undiscovered. The final wing of the lab is home to what they call the spinning weapon. It's the thing that looks like a massive daisy flower, and true to its name, it, well, spins. God knows what the toy makers envisioned this doing. The large propeller blade things, according to the instructions, are supposed to press back onto the head of this cannon, like some kind of mechanical foreskin. But the plastic is so thin on the propeller, and the parts on my playset are in unused condition. So I'm not about to deliberately stress bend these blades when I don't have to. I'm happy to just let this weird thing look more like a motorboat outboard and less like a giant Johnson.
Isn't that a daisy?
Underneath the flower cannon is a prison cell for the villains, because you always need a jail in a lab for the human test subjects to give Professor Sharp more opportunities to break down the ethical boundaries between nature and experimental science. And speaking of Professor Sharp, I would forgive this playset all of its sins as being a grab bag of random BS that's neither fun to play with nor logically motivated if it just came with an action figure of Professor Sharp. But it didn't. Sharp was the only major character not included in the LJN line, and his absence is really felt when you're staring at this monstrosity. It's a laboratory, one that Sharp was always manning in the show because it was his secret lab. This isn't the Bennett family house playset. It should have been called Professor Sharp's lab. Not having him here creates the same problem as the Voltron Castle of Lions not having a figure of Koran to run it while the pilots are saving the world. Professor Sharp is the guy in the chair for this superhero story. Hell, they literally made his flying chair into a toy and left him out of the line altogether. He should have been packed in with this playset without question. Otherwise, there's no point to this thing existing. I'll never say LJN didn't give Bionic 6 their all with this line. The action figures and the vehicles were ambitious in their die-cast materials and their intricate, eye-popping paint schemes. Their attempt to make the vehicles interact the same way they did in the animated series is equally laudable. But in this super future display for me, am I so very proud to be a Bionic 6 owner?